The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and regret, a sterile scent that clung to the walls like frost on a winter window. Walter Grayson, 82 years old, lay in the narrow bed, his thin frame barely disturbing the crisp white sheets. His hands, gnarled from decades of labor, rested limply on his chest, clutching a small, faded photograph of his late wife, Evelyn. The heart monitor beeped rhythmically, a mechanical heartbeat that filled the silence where family should have been. It was Christmas Eve, and the world outside buzzed with warm families gathering, carols drifting through the snow-dusted streets of Burlington, Vermont. But inside room 312, the only sound was the faint hum of the heater and Walter's shallow breaths. He stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles for the 100th time that day. 56. The number hadn't changed, but he kept counting, hoping it might distract him from the ache in his chest, not the physical pain that had landed him here after a heart scare, but the deeper wound of absence. His daughter, Claire, had promised to visit. His son, Michael, had texted a vague, "We'll be there soon." His grandchildren, Sophie and Liam, had sent a card with glittery snowflakes that now sat unopened on the bedside table. But the hours ticked by, and the door remained closed. No footsteps echoed in the hallway. No voices called his name. Walter wasn't naive. He knew his family was busy. Claire, 45, ran a real estate business that consumed her days. Michael, 42, was a lawyer with a corner office and a schedule that left no room for sentiment. The grandchildren, teenagers now, were caught up in their own world's phones, friends, and fleeting interests. But this was Christmas. Surely, they'd make time. Surely, they'd remember the man who'd raised them, loved them, sacrificed for them. The photograph in his hands trembled slightly. Evelyn's smile, frozen in time, seemed to whisper to him, "They'll come, Walter. They always do." But Evelyn had been gone for 10 years, and her optimism felt like a cruel echo now. He closed his eyes, letting memories flood in better memories, from a time when the house was alive with laughter. Christmas mornings when Claire and Michael were small, tearing into presents under a lopsided tree. Evelyn's voice singing Silent Night as she basted the turkey. The warmth of togetherness that no hospital room could replicate. A knock at the door jolted him awake. His heart leapt, a foolish hope flaring. But it was only Nurse Emily, a kind-faced woman in her 30s who'd been checking on him all week. "Merry Christmas Eve, Mr. Grayson," she said, her smile soft but tinged with pity. She adjusted his foredrip and glanced at the empty chair by his bed. "Any visitors yet?" Walter forced a smile, his voice raspy. "Not yet. They're busy folks." Emily nodded, her eyes saying she understood more than she let on. "Well, I brought you something." She pulled a small, foil-wrapped chocolate from her pocket and placed it on his table. "Don't tell Dr. Harris. He'd have my head for sneaking you sweets." He chuckled weakly, grateful for her warmth. "You're too good to me, Emily." She lingered a moment, then squeezed his hand. "You deserve it, Mr. Grayson. Try to get some rest." She left, and the room fell silent again. Walter unwrapped the chocolate, the foil crinkling in his trembling fingers. He didn't eat it, just held it, staring at the shiny wrapper as if it held answers. He thought of the Christmases he'd spent with his family, the ones he'd planned for this year. He'd bought gifts, wrapped them carefully despite his arthritis, and left them under the tree in his small apartment. A scarf for Claire, A leather-bound journal for Michael. Books for Sophie and Liam. He'd imagined their faces lighting up, the way they used to. But now, those gifts sat untouched. And he was here, alone. The clock struck midnight, ushering in Christmas Day. No one came. Walter's hope withered, replaced by a quiet, simmering resolve. He wasn't angry, not yet. But something shifted inside him. A realization as cold and sharp as the December air. His family had chosen their priorities, and he wasn't one of them. He reached for the phone on the bedside table, his fingers steady despite the ache in his joints. He dialed a number he hadn't called in years, his old friend, Harold Bennett, a lawyer who'd handled Evelyn's estate. The line rang twice before Harold's gravelly voice answered. "Walter, that you? It's midnight. You old dog." "Harold," Walter said, his voice low but firm. "I need a favor. A big one." Harold's office smelled of polished wood and old books, a stark contrast to the hospital's antiseptic chill. Walter sat across from him. 3 days after Christmas, his hospital discharge papers tucked into the pocket of his worn coat. The heart scare had been a warning, not a sentence. His doctor had prescribed rest and medication. But Walter's mind was far from restful. The chair creaked under him as he leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Harold's lined face. "You sure about this, Walt?" Harold asked, peering over his glasses. His pen hovered over a legal pad, ready to take notes. "This is a big step." Walter nodded, his jaw tight. "I'm sure." "They didn't come, Harold. Not one of them. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, nothing. I waited." His voice cracked, betraying the hurt he'd tried to bury. "I've given them everything. My whole life. And they couldn't spare an hour." Harold sighed, scribbling something down. "I get it. I do. But changing your will, it's not just about money. It's a message. A permanent one." "Good," Walter said, his voice steady now. "I want them to hear it." The decision hadn't come lightly. Walter had spent those lonely hospital hours replaying his life, sifting through decades of memories. He'd worked 2 jobs to put Claire through college, sold his beloved fishing boat to pay for Michael's law school. He'd attended every recital, every game, every milestone, even when Evelyn's illness had drained him. And after she passed, he'd poured his love into his grandchildren, telling them stories, teaching them to whittle, saving every penny for their futures. But somewhere along the way, his family had drifted. Claire's calls became perfunctory. Michael's visits were rushed, always tied to some favor loan, a signature. The grandchildren barely looked up from their phones when he spoke. He'd excused it all, chalking it up to busy lives. But the hospital had been a wake-up call, a mirror held to his loneliness. He wasn't just a father or grandfather anymore, was an inconvenience. Harold tapped his pen against the desk. "All right. Let's go through it. Your estate savings. The apartment. The cabin up north. You want to redirect it." Walter took a deep breath. "Not all of it. The kids, Sophie and Liam, they get something. They're young. They might still learn. But Claire and Michael," he paused, the words heavy. "They get nothing. Not a dime." Harold raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "And the rest? You mentioned a charity." "The community center," Walter said. "The one on Maple Street. They do good work, meals for seniors, programs for kids. Evelyn loved that place. I want the bulk of it to go there." Harold nodded, jotting down details. I'll draft it up. We'll need a witness. And I'd recommend a letter to go with it something to explain your reasons. It'll make things clearer for everyone. Walter agreed, though the thought of writing that letter felt like carving his heart into words. He left Harold's office with a weight lifted but a new one settling in its place. He wasn't a vindictive man. He didn't want to hurt his family. Not really. But he needed them to understand to feel the sting of their neglect. The way he'd felt it in that hospital bed. Back at his apartment, Walter sat at his small kitchen table, the unwrapped Christmas gifts still stacked in the corner. He pulled out a notepad and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then poured out like a dam breaking. Dear Claire, Michael, Sophie, and Liam, I've loved you all my life, more than you'll ever know. But love isn't a one-way street. I waited for you this Christmas, waited for a sign that I still mattered. You didn't come. And in that silence, I realized something. I deserve better. He paused, his pen hovering. The truth was raw, painful, but necessary. He wrote on, detailing the years of sacrifice, the loneliness that had grown like a shadow over his heart. He didn't spare them, but he didn't curse them either. He wrote with love, tempered by resolve. When he finished, he sealed the letter and placed it in an envelope marked for Harold. Then he stood, his knees creaking, and looked out the window at the snow-covered street. The world felt quieter now, as if he'd finally claimed a piece of it for himself. The community center on Maple Street was alive with activity when Walter arrived a week later. Children laughed in the gymnasium, their voices echoing off the walls. Seniors gathered in the common room, sipping coffee and playing cards. Walter stood in the doorway, his coat dusted with fresh snow, and felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. This place, with its worn floors and chipped paint, was a heartbeat of its own, a place where people still cared. He'd come to meet Margaret, the center's director, to discuss his donation. She greeted him with a wide smile, her gray curls bouncing as she shook his hand. Mr. Grayson, this is incredible, she said, holding the preliminary paperwork Harold had sent over. This kind of gift could keep our programs running for years. Walter waved off her gratitude. Embarrassed. Just want to do some good. Margaret. Evelyn would have wanted it. They talked for an hour, planning how the funds would be used: new computers for the kids, a renovated kitchen for the meal program, scholarships for low-income families. Walter felt a spark of purpose, something he hadn't felt since Evelyn's death. But as he left the center, his phone buzzed. Claire's name flashed on the screen. He hesitated, then answered. Hello. Dad. Where are you? Her voice was sharp, tinged with irritation. Michael and I have been trying to reach you. We heard you were out of the hospital. Walter's grip tightened on the phone. I'm at the community center. And yeah, I'm out. Been out for days. A pause. Then, why didn't you tell us? We were worried. He laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Worried. You didn't visit me once. Claire. Not you. Not Michael. Not the kids. Christmas came and went, and I was alone. Another pause. Longer this time. Dad. We were busy. It was a crazy week. You know how it is. I know how it is, Walter said quietly. That's why I changed my will. The line went silent. When Claire spoke again, her voice was tight. What do you mean? Changed your will? I'm done waiting for you to care. You and Michael Yuri out. The kids get a little, but the rest goes to the community center. You'll get my letter when I'm gone. Dad, you can't be serious. Claire's voice rose, a mix of shock and anger. You're punishing us for being busy, for having lives. It's not about punishment, Walter said, his voice steady. It's about respect. I gave you everything. Claire, all I asked for was a little of your time. She tried to argue, but Walter cut her off. Come to the apartment tonight. Both of you. We'll talk then. He hung up before she could respond. That evening, Claire and Michael arrived, their faces a mix of guilt and defiance. Sophie and Liam weren't with them, too busy, Walter assumed. The conversation was tense, the air thick with unspoken resentments. Claire accused him of overreacting. Michael called the will change spiteful. Walter listened, his heart heavy but unyielding. You think this is about money? He said at last, his voice low. It's about family. I was in that hospital, thinking I might not make it, and you couldn't even call. I'm not cutting you out because I hate you. I'm doing it because I love you enough to want you to learn. They left without resolution, their anger hanging in the air like smoke. Walter sat alone, the weight of his decision settling deeper. He didn't know if they'd ever understand, but he hoped they'd try. Winter deepened, and January brought a bitter cold to Burlington. Walter threw himself into volunteering at the community center, finding solace in the routine. He helped serve meals, read to the younger kids, and even taught a woodworking class for teens. The work filled the hours, but it couldn't erase the rift with his family. Claire and Michael hadn't called since their argument, and the grandchildren remained distant, their lives a mystery to him. One afternoon, as Walter swept the gymnasium floor, Sophie appeared in the doorway. She was 16, all sharp angles and nervous energy, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, but her eyes were soft, uncertain. Grandpa. Her voice was small, almost lost in the echo of the gym. Walter leaned on the broom, surprised. Sophie, what are you doing here? She shifted, glancing at the floor. Mom told me about the will. And what happened at Christmas? I didn't know you were alone. Grandpa, I swear. He studied her, searching for sincerity. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and he realized she'd been crying. You could have called, he said, not unkindly. I know. She bit her lip. I was caught up with friends. School. I didn't think. I'm sorry. The apology hung between them, fragile but real. Walter set the broom aside and gestured to a bench. They sat, the silence heavy but not hostile. Sophie spoke first, her words tumbling out. She talked about school, her fears of disappointing her parents, the pressure to be perfect. Walter listened, his heart softening. She wasn't making excuses, she was trying to understand. I don't want you to hate us, she said finally, her voice breaking. I don't want to lose you. Walter reached for her hand, his own trembling slightly. I could never hate you, Sophie. Never. But I need you to see me, not just when it's convenient. She nodded, tears spilling over. Can I come back? Help out here? Maybe. He smiled, the first real smile in weeks. I'd like that. Sophie started volunteering the next week. Awkward at first, but eager to learn. She helped with the kids, her shyness giving way to laughter as they tugged at her sleeves, begging for stories. Walter watched her, a flicker of hope rekindling. Maybe this was a start. Liam, her younger brother, showed up a few days later, prodded by Sophie. At 14, he was all bravado and slouched posture, but he listened when Walter taught him to sand a wooden birdhouse. They didn't talk about the hospital or the will, just worked side by side. The silence comfortable. For the first time in months, Walter felt like a grandfather again. Claire and Michael remained distant, their pride a wall Walter couldn't breach. But the grandchildren's efforts gave him hope. He began to wonder if his letter, his decision, could be a bridge rather than a blade. He called Harold, asking him to hold off on finalizing the will. "I'm not changing it yet," he said, "but I want to see where this goes." Spring arrived, tentative and green, thawing the snow in Walter's heart. The community center became a second home, a place where he and his grandchildren built something new. Sophie and Liam came regularly now, their presence a quiet apology for the past. They didn't talk about the hospital often, but when they did, it was with honesty, not excuses. One Saturday, as they painted a mural on the center's wall, a bright scene of kids playing under a summer sky, Sophie asked, "Grandpa, do you think Mom and Dad will ever come around?" Walter dipped his brush in blue paint, considering. "I don't know, Sophie. Sometimes people need a shock to see what's right in front of them. I hope they will." She nodded, her brush moving in careful strokes. "I read your letter. The one you wrote for the lawyer. Mom showed it to me. It hurt to read. But I get it now. Why you were so mad." He paused, surprised. "You read it?" "Yeah. It made me cry." She looked at him, her eyes older than her years. "I don't want to be like that, Grandpa. I don't want to take you for granted." Walter's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her it was okay, that he forgave them all, but the words felt too big. Instead, he squeezed her shoulder. "You're here now? That's what matters." Liam, nearby, piped up. "I told Mom she should come help out. She said she's thinking about it." Walter raised an eyebrow, skeptical but hopeful. Claire thinking about anything was a step, however small. A week later, Claire showed up. She stood in the community center's kitchen, looking out of place in her tailored coat, her arms crossed tightly. Walter was peeling carrots for the meal program, his hands steady despite the shock of seeing her. "Dad," she said, her voice softer than he'd expected. "Can we talk?" They stepped outside, the spring air cool against their faces. Claire looked tired, her usual confidence frayed. "I've been a terrible daughter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. I thought you'd always be there, no matter what." Walter listened, his heart a tangle of pain and hope. "I've always been there, Claire. But I needed you to be there too." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "I know. I'm sorry. I want to make this right." It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet. But it was a crack in the wall, a chance to rebuild. Michael was slower to come around, his pride a tougher barrier. But a month later, he joined them at the center, helping repair a broken fence. He didn't say much, but his presence was enough for now. Walter began to see his family differently, not as the perfect unit he'd once imagined, but as flawed, human, capable of change. He didn't tear up the will, but he asked Harold to revise it, leaving room for his children to earn their way back. Not with money, but with time. By the time December rolled around again, Burlington was blanketed in snow, the streets aglow with lights. Walter stood in the community center's gymnasium, now decorated with garlands and a towering Christmas tree. The air smelled of pine and hot cocoa, and the room buzzed with voices. Kids, volunteers, seniors, all gathered for the center's annual holiday party. Walter wore a red sweater Sophie had picked out, a small rebellion against his usual flannel. She and Liam were there, helping serve food and laughing with the younger kids. Claire was in the kitchen, organizing trays of cookies with Margaret. Michael, to Walter's surprise, was setting up a karaoke machine. His tie loosened, a rare smile on his face. The year had been a journey, not just for Walter, but for all of them. The hospital, the will, the letter. They'd been a wake-up call, a painful but necessary reckoning. Claire and Michael had started showing up, not just at the center, but at Walter's apartment, bringing dinner, asking about his day. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Sophie and Liam had become fixtures in his life, their visits no longer obligations, but moments of joy. As the party wound down, Walter stepped outside, needing a moment to breathe. The snow fell softly, dusting his shoulders. He thought of Evelyn, of the Christmases they'd shared, and felt her presence in the quiet. He didn't feel alone anymore. Claire joined him, her coat wrapped tightly around her. "Dad, I got you something." She handed him a small box, wrapped in simple paper. He opened it, revealing a photo frame. Inside was a picture from tonight. Walter, Claire, Michael, Sophie, and Liam, laughing together under the Christmas tree. His eyes stung as he looked at it, the weight of the year settling into something softer, warmer. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. Claire hugged him, her arms tight. "Merry Christmas, Dad. I'm glad you're here." He hugged her back, feeling the family he'd almost lost. The will, still tucked away with Harold, was a reminder of how far they'd come. He didn't need it anymore, not as a weapon, but as a lesson. Love, he'd learned, wasn't just given. It was built, day by day, choice by choice. As they walked back inside, the sound of carols filled the air. Walter looked at his family, at the community they'd become part of, and knew this Christmas was different. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs.